Okay, hello chess players. Today we're going to be taking a look at the King's Indian, which begins after d4, knight f6, c4, g6. This begins the King's Indian defense. And then more specifically, we're going to be taking a look at the Sämisch again. This is going to be a deeper dive into some of the more specific lines in the Sämisch that begin after knight c3, bishop g7, e4 castles, pawn to f3, and we'll just have pawn to d6, sort of beginning the Sämisch variation. We're going to be taking a deeper dive into the more specific lines in the Sämisch that I didn't get a chance to go over in the other video, which was basically just an overview of all the theory. It ended up being a 25-minute video. This is going to be a shorter video, but we're going to go more into depth into some of the more specific main lines. So anyways, we're going to have bishop e3, we're going to have c5, and of course dx c5, dx c5. If you want to take a look at those lines, take a look at the other video. I do give a pretty good overview of them in the other video. So instead, we're going to have this main line Benonie, beginning with the move pawn to d5, and then we're going to have pawn to d5, and then we're going to have pawn to e6. We're going to have queen d2. We're going to have e takes d5, and we're going to have c takes d5, beginning the Benonie. So when we begin the Benonie, I pointed out in the other video, it's very important to keep this bishop on the h3 square. And I gave a lot of the theory behind rook e8 and a6, and then of course I gave my overall recommendation, which was actually to play knight a6. And knight a6 is the line that I kind of want to go into more depth, because I do think it's kind of important to understand everything that's going on with knight a6 and to understand how to play it and to understand how to play against all the options. So of course the reason I like knight a6 is I just like the idea of guaranteeing that I will get play on the queen side no matter what. Once you plant that knight on c7, a6 and b5 is no longer a stoppable idea. So you will be getting play. But one thing that I didn't really get a chance to go into is all the multiple ways that white can actually try to play against this. Some of them are very direct. So you do have to be prepared for some very direct plans. Now, one idea that I did point out in the other video is if they say shuffle, like say after knight c7, I pointed out they do kind of have to play a4. For example, if they play knight g3, you have the immediate b5, which is apparently supposed to be good. Now, the idea is really cute. It's knight b5, bishop b5, rook b8, a4, a6, bishop back, and then you play h5, and then you sacrifice with knight g4 because rook b2 is a threat. And here, black actually has an advantage according to the engine. This is actually slight edge black. An example would be knight takes, rook takes, bishop g4, queen a5 check, rook b2 takes. This is slight edge black according to the engine, and I have to agree, this is probably just slight edge black. So knight g3 can be met with b5, so knight c7, they kind of have to play a4, and then we're going to have a6. But here, we do really have more than one choice here for white on how to proceed. Like, usually white will try to just get play on the king side, because black is guaranteeing that play on the queen side. And if white tries to play on the queen side, it tends to blow up in his face. So the line that I gave as an example of that in the other video was just knight c1, which is totally reasonable, rook b8, and then if they play rook b1 with the idea of b4, as soon as they play b4, they're lost, because now b takes a4 takes, and then this knight fd5 move does in fact work. And this is a very cute tactical idea that just completely wins the game. An example would be like e d5, bishop c3, and then the rook on b1 hangs, and black has a huge advantage here. So typically, knight c1 isn't anything to worry about. When they play knight c1, you should just play rook b8, and then no matter what they do, you should play b5, and black already has achieved, at the very least, like complete equality here. And actually, white's pieces are a little misplaced on the queen side, like the knight on c1 and the rook on b1. Unless white can dominate on the queen side, he really just shouldn't be playing over there. But what I really needed to go into more depth on was what happens if, white just plays for mate in any number of ways, beginning with knight to g3, which is totally reasonable. Bishop d7, and then the main line that I went over in the video was I showed like bishop e2. But it is also possible for white to just kind of go nuts. Like white can play bishop h6 and just say, hey, I'm going to play for mate. Now this is something I do want to point out. When you play the knight a6 to c7 line, it's actually really important not to include the move rook to e8. And a lot of people will lose games with black because they tend to mix these moves. They tend to play rook e8, knight c7, and then try to play everything. They want to play bishop d7, rook b8, and b5. When white plays something like knight g3, you do not have time to play everything. You will get mated. So like rook e8, if you play that here, and then you take your sweet time building up to b5, bishop d7, rook b8, b5, he's going to play bishop h6, and he's going to play for mate against your king, and he'll get it, because every tempo matters when somebody's playing for mate. So you don't have time for a move like rook e8. Instead, what you have to do is you have to try to get in that b5 as quickly as possible, which is why you probably don't even have time for something like rook b8, as long as you can get in b5. So like bishop d7, that's why on bishop e2, just the immediate b5 is the acceptable move. You don't want to, prep it any further, so to speak. So when they play a move like bishop h6, and I didn't go over this move, how do we meet this? Well, again, you're playing a Benonie. You have to get play. White's playing for mate. So the correct idea here is every tempo matters. The correct idea, and according to the engine, the correct idea is to take on h6, and then queen takes h6, and then notice when queen takes h6, this b2 pawn is abandoned. That's important. I know the queen's closer to your king, and he's much closer to getting mate. It's scary, yes. But you haven't wasted any tempo yet in this position, and that's critical. This gives you a chance to go after b2. So you should play the immediate b5. You don't prep it. You don't play rook b8. You don't play rook e8. You don't play other moves in this position. You have to play this immediate b5. You have to open up the position on the queen side as quickly as physically possible. So white's going to play for mate, of course. White's going to play h4. You need to open that queen side. B takes a4. h5. Here you're going to play queen e7. This is the only defensive move that works according to the engine. And then after hg6, you're going to play fg6, and everything is apparently held. And you have plenty of counterplay on the queen side with stuff like rook b8, hitting the b2 square. The bishop still controls that diagonal and controls the h3 square, which is going to be a very helpful defensive resource. And of course, the queen on e7 is controlling the h7 square. Another nice thing about this bishop's defensive resource is it also controls, the f5 square as a potential infiltration point, etc. Anyways, the engine gives this as major advantage black, and black should actually have sort of a winning advantage here. Black is going to be breaking through on the queen side. So again, going back to like, how do we handle this like against best play? Like bishop d7, bishop e2. Again, we have no time to waste. We need to play a move like b5, and then we're going to have castles, and then we're going to have b takes a4. The position is unclear, and of course it just goes like a lot deeper than this. After knight takes a4, you do have to play very exactly. You have to start trying to get rid of the pieces. And this is another theme that I didn't really get a chance to touch on. Whenever you're playing a Benonie, you have less space, and typically piece exchanges are good for you. So the more pieces that you exchange, the safer your position gets. And that's true even like if you're down material. Like in this main line that the computer gives, black actually ends up being down a pawn at the end of everything. But it's all okay because we end up getting a lot of the material off the board, and we end up getting to an endgame that's perfectly holdable. So we'd have something like b4 here, c takes b4, knight b6, rook b8, bishop takes b5, knight takes b5, rook takes a6, so that pawn just went away, and now there's a threat of taking this pawn on c3, and then there's threats in the back here of bad things happening. So knight c3 is sort of forced. Then we're going to have knight c4. We cannot hold this pawn on d6. It's going to fall. So the main thing here is just to make sure that we get plenty of counterplay to compensate for the loss of that pawn. So here we're going to play knight d7, we're going to have rook d6, queen e7, bishop g5, queen back to e8. We just wanted to deflect that bishop away from the c5 square because that's where we're planning on planting our knight later. Bishop back to f4, rook c8, controlling that f5 square, knight b6, knight b6, knight b6, and then we have knight back to a4 with now the idea of bishop c3. So no rook b4 because bishop c3, so everything very tactically justified. Note that black is now officially down a pawn. We are trying to prove that we have enough counterplay with this passed pawn on b2 and with the placement of our pieces that everything is okay. But of course, I mean, just looking at the position, it looks like maybe it's not okay because it looks like he's going to play bishop d6, etc., possibly winning the exchange. But as it turns out, if you run this on the engine gives complete equality. Black is still doing very well here. So rook b7, bishop c3, gaining that tempo, queen e3, and then knight c5, and everything is miraculously held together. And according to the engine, the position is completely equal. Even though white has these two very scary pawns in the middle of the board, it's actually hard to push them or advance them without yielding some sort of advantage to black. And there's also tons of counter threats that black has of just pushing this pawn down the board, threats against this rook that isn't particularly well placed, and of course, there's fewer pieces on the board, which helps black in defending this position and helps them in terms of holding it. So anyways, those are some of the deeper lines and sort of the main line of the Sämisch, where like you go into those main line Benonie variations, and you need that deeper preparation and you need that computer preparation, maybe if you're playing against a really good opponent. And again, I only focused on these lines where you retreat your knight to, where you play knight a6 and you retreat your knight to c7, because I honestly think if you have this in your repertoire, this is the only line you need. you're going to end up getting your play on the queen side no matter what, and you don't need to go through memorizing all of the insane complications of all of the different ways that white can develop his knights in these variations where you have to change the way that you play, and you have to know the theory very deeply in all three main lines of, knight g3, knight d1, and knight c1, and you have to completely change the way that you play chess depending on which line that he chooses. It's a lot of theory, and it's hard to do everything completely right without making a mistake. And that's the main reason that I like to recommend this idea of knight a6 followed by knight c7. Anyways, I hope you found this video helpful. I hope you learned something new about chess. Thank you very much for watching.